In this series of talks, we learn more about some of the artists included in the 2020 Craft Invitational. Running through October 11th, 2020, the exhibition includes over 70 works by a select group of regionally based craftspeople working in ceramic, glass, wood, paper, and metal. The exhibition highlights fine craft, with an emphasis on traditional materials handled in unexpected and innovative ways. The artists in this exhibition are transforming basic, familiar materials into complex, insightful works of art. In the process, they are not only keeping traditional craft techniques alive, they are blazing new technical and creative paths for future craft artists.
For me anyway, they're a very easy form technically to make. And so there's not a lot of, the clay sort of naturally wants to form a bowl shape when you're throwing it on the wheel. And so a small bowl is very simple to make, kind of easy to make, and you're free to kind of think about all of the surface marks that are happening while you're making it. And you don't have to think too much about thinning it out perfectly. If you were making a great big tall vessel, the walls of the pot are soft, and so you can get it too thin and it will collapse. And so those kinds of worries aren't present when you're making this sort of thing. I sort of make them in series. So I'll make 8 to 16 at a time. And usually I'm sort of thinking about a particular kind of surface, or even the glaze that I'm going to glaze it with eventually while I'm making them. And each one is a little bit different. When you asked me to be in the show, there were several Yunomi that I'd sort of been saving from past firings, and these were some of my favorites. These are from different times and different firings, and also different series of pots. So they sort of represent, I don't know, all the different kind of avenues I've followed down when I'm making these things. When these are being made, the clay is turning on a wheel, and your hands are squeezing the clay and sort of moving up the wall or down the wall or whatever. But it's a kinetic thing, so it's not a stationary object. And so the movement that is occurring shows up in the resulting form, and it's sort of once the pot is dried and fired, of course, that it's frozen, but the marks of that rhythm are there. So in looking at it, you can sense the movement, and not only the movement, but even pressures, especially if you're knowledgeable about how they're made or you've made them yourself, you can kind of feel all that just by looking at the surface of this object that's stationary. So it contains color, texture, but also movement and kind of time, which is, I think that's one of the most interesting aspects of making these for me. I dipped this pot when it was leather hard into that clay, so it has a coating of that clay on the outside. When you dip it in there, everything is wet still, and so then I just finger combed it. So with my fingers, drug my hand through the surface. So the lighter areas is where my finger sort of wiped that clay slip away. And the local clay has a lot of iron in it, so it's very dark red. And then I bisque fired it, and then I put this whitish glaze over the top of it. And so you can see that where I wiped the local clay away, it's white, and where the local clay is still there and the white glaze is over the top of it, the iron-rich local clay has kind of bubbled up through the white glaze and left those marks. So this one was particularly interesting to me in the way that this happened. And some of the bubbling, it was a little bit of an accident because it happens during a certain stage in the firing. This would be very hard to duplicate. because I would have to have it in the right place in the kiln and have the temperature rise happen the same way that this happened in that particular spot. So
Right.
I've tried it again and been unsuccessful. So they're they're still very nice, but they're not as lively as this one with all those little spots. This is porcelain. So the clay body itself is white underneath the glaze, and the glaze is a glaze I make from wood ashes. Since I wanted to make these kind of incised marks on the surface, when I made this, I made it very smooth on the outside, so not with those throwing ridges and that sort of thing. And then when this was leather hard, kind of about half dry, with a fettling knife, I made those marks with the intention of, once it was bisque fired, then I painted iron oxide on the surface and then sponged it off. And so it's kind of like antiquing. So the iron stayed in those lines. And then I put this wood ash glaze on it, which is fluid enough that when it melts in the kiln, that iron melted out into the glaze. And again, gravity then just made it kind of move downwards from the line. So all of those are sort of little curtains of yellow and brown are coming from the iron, melting into the glaze and then moving downward. So I will throw the pot on the wheel thick and then cut it right there on the wheel while it's very soft. And so I'm cutting it with a cheese cutter and just slicing down the side of it. And as you can see, what the pressure of that cutting the side sort of affects the height of the rim. And so that kind of undulating rim, which I really like, is due to the fact that I'm cutting it on the sides, and that's sort of pulling the clay downwards a little bit. And then that edge that's left at the top, after I've cut all the way around, is a little bit sharp. So I turn the wheel and just with a wet finger kind of round off that outside edge so it's not sharp anymore. After it's bisque fired, then I dip it in a clay slip. When I dipped it, the pot was upside down. I had a hold of the foot ring and I'm dipping it. And so you push it down in the glaze. The rim is the first part to go into the glaze. And then or the slip. And when I pull it back up, of course, the slip is kind of flowing down. And so imagine this upside down. So just under the rim, it's whiter. So the slip has collected there, so it's whiter. And then on the edge above the foot ring, just before where the facets start, it's also whiter. So the slip has kind of collected there. And then on the surface in the middle, you can kind of see, so when the facets are cut, the clay ends up being thinner sometimes right in the center of that cut. So see the little areas that are a little darker gray. And so what's happening is when it's dipped in the slip and when it's dipped in the glaze, that area is absorbing water. And once it absorbs too much water, it can't absorb anymore. And so the accumulation of glaze in that particular area is less than what it is where the clay is thicker. So gosh, it's like the color is the clue, and the thickness of the glaze is the clue to the structure of the pot, or maybe even how it's made. It's kind of an interesting concept. With these particular pots, the foot ring on the bottom is cut out, so there's a recessed area there. So I'll hold the pot upside down and I'll pour a little bit of glaze in there and then dump it out. And then I'll grab the pot by the foot ring, and you can see on the left side of this toward the bottom, there's a little mark, probably right in there is a mark of one of my fingers holding the foot ring.
Okay.
And so I'm holding it upside down and I dip it in the glaze, and I can dip it up to that mark. It usually goes over that. And so after it's glazed, I'll clean that off. This particular piece isn't like any of the Chinese pots that I've seen, although there might be some that look like this, or even the African pots. But when I started making them, those were my influences. I think one of the sort of subtle influences from the African pottery, which really I find interesting, is that since a lot of those pots were made at a very similar method, coiling, scraping, paddling, and when you make things on a wheel, it's kind of a mechanical device, and it's almost like cheating a little bit, because since the pot is going around, the potter's wheel is making the thing go around, and whatever pressure you apply, if you're careful, you can apply that same pressure all the way around the pot, because it just moves through your hands and you're holding your hands still. When you're making something by hand, you don't have that kind of mechanical tool to make sure that everything is the same all the way around. So it's more by feel and eyeball. And so it's not perfect. So it sort of looks kind of perfect, but it's not. And it's subtly not perfect. And so to me, when I perceive these shapes, they have a little bit of vitality to them that is different from a pot that's thrown on a wheel. And I think it's partly because they are slightly irregular. The only other thing I would say is there's two potters, Hans Koper and Lucy Ree, who were making pots in England, I think early in the 20th century, who they have probably, the shape of this reminds me more of their pots than the Chinese or the African. But so it's kind of a mix of a bunch of different influences. Oh, that with these, then I glaze the inside, and I just thought I wanted a dark interior, and so I have this glaze that's almost black, or it's a really dark brown, and so I pour that on the inside, roll it around, pour it out, and I kind of like the fact that the inside is so dark, so when you're looking at the pot and you can kind of see that the inside is dark, it's just a nice contrast, and it's kind of calls attention to that empty space that's there. So then after I glaze the inside like that, then I spray a mixture of clay and wood ashes onto the surface. Wherever there's a groove or a mark that I've made intentionally, or marks that are made just in the making process, those also have collected more iron. So those sort of show up. So at the bottom where the form changes, the angle, you can see some grooves that kind of go up at an angle a little bit. And that's because of a tool that I was using to kind of scrape the clay with. The kind of vertical mark on, yes, that's an intentional mark that I put in there. And yes, it was. Okay. And then there's some other little places around it that are intentional. And this wood ash clay slip depends a lot on the wood ashes that I get from my friends. And so it's mixed wood ash. It's not a particular kind of tree or wood. And of course, I'll mix up a batch, and then eventually I'll run out of it, and I have to mix more. And it doesn't always come out the same way. So some batches, the color has been different, and in some batches the color's much richer, and I like it more. So that's always I get kind of anxious when I'm running out of the glaze, and I have to mix up a new batch. I don't know how it's going to come out. Yeah, it's been interesting. I guess in May every year, the Clay Collective, which is a group of local potters here, has a spring pottery tour. And so by March, we had printed our brochures, which we were about to mail out to people. And at that point, we met and decided that we couldn't do it, so we canceled the event. So that's a big event for me and everyone else. And also, I have 2 guest potters that show with me, so they couldn't participate. And what was interesting about it for me is that it normally when you have a show, you've got a deadline, and so when you're making pots, you have to stop at some point and start glazing, and then fire, and then of course clean up your studio and all of that. And it was kind of a relief, to not have to do it, because I was making some of these big hand-built pieces that are behind me, and it was felt like I was kind of in a groove, making. And it was nice not to have to stop kind of artificially and start doing something else. And I thought, this is great, because I can just kind of let this making process and kind of momentum that I had, I can just let it continue until it kind of runs its course. I am getting ready to put my website online shop up. So I've been taking a lot of photographs and getting ready for that. So maybe I'll be able to make a few sales that way. The other thing about the COVID virus thing is that in some ways it just kind of shut down, and I have not been very productive this summer. Along with, I sort of finished my momentum thing. I eventually did a firing in the middle of June, which I would have done in the middle of April. And once I did that, I kind of focused on some other things. I mean, I did some projects at home. My kiln shed needed painting very badly, so I spent about a week working on that. And I just recently have sort of gotten back into starting to make things again. And even now, in that process, I don't have a goal in mind except to just have fun. So I've been making some things that are just total sort of whimsical kinds of things. Gosh, thank you for inviting me, and I think it's a great thing that you do there to kind of show this kind of work. I think it's important. So thank you.